Here I am. I'm going to talk to you about the urinary system. So fist pump, that means you're almost done with 202, and I know you're thrilled. Let me get my pen started. Hang on just a second. There we go. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the urinary system. One thing I want to say before I start is if you haven't watched Miss Graham's videos on the urinary anatomy, make sure you do that first. One thing about the urinary system, the anatomy and physiology are closely related, so you want to make sure you have a good understanding of the anatomy before we talk about the physiology. So if you haven't done that, stop. I'll see you later. Go back, watch Miss Graham's video, and then come back and do this one. Okay, so you've watched her video. Let's get started. What we're talking about is the urinary system. When we talk about the urinary system, we're talking about the kidneys. Okay, going back to that 201 when we first talked about the general overview of the whole body. You've got your kidneys, you've got your ureters or your ureters, two of those. You have the urinary bladder, and then there is a urethra, which is behind my little thing here, which transports the urine out of the body. So the kidneys are the major excretory organs. That means they help you get rid of waste products. The ureters transport the urine, which is what you form from your kidneys, from the kidney to the bladder. The bladder is a storage facility, and then the urethra allows you to have the urine leave the body. Now, one thing that I've had students in the past get confused about when you talk about the urinary system, there's some other terms that we associate with the urinary system, especially in the medical field, and sometimes that tends to confuse people. So I want to throw those out there really quick just to kind of make sure everybody knows when I say certain things what I'm talking about. Obviously, renal, that's kidneys. Okay, anytime I'm a renal physiologist, I spent 6 years at UAB studying the kidney, so that makes me a renal physiologist. I didn't study the ureters or the bladder or anything else, just the kidney. You may have heard of someone called a urologist. All right, and there's also something called a nephrologist. Okay, so I was a renal physiologist. That means I studied the kidney. Physiologist, no, there's no in there. There you go, physiologist. And a urologist. These are both MDs, or doctors. I'm a doctor too, PhD, but these are MDs. All right, urologists are basically surgeons. And nephrology is internal medicine. And I hear people all the time say that they're going to their urologist or their nephrologist and they're not really sure which one they're actually going to, so I wanted to kind of give you a heads up on what that actually meant. The urologists, they are your surgeons. So if you have, they will take care of some general problems of the kidney and bladder and things like that, urinary tract infections, kidney stones, but they also do repair. So if you have cancer or a prostate problem or a blockage, anything that needs to have a surgical intervention, those are your urologists. Your nephrologists, they deal with the kidney. And if you know someone that's maybe on dialysis, which is an artificial way to cleanse the blood if your kidneys are no longer working, they're going to be under the care of a nephrologist, and that's the division of internal medicine. So again, these are two words that people see associated with the kidney, but they're not quite sure who these people are, so I wanted to kind of explain that, because I usually get some student will ask me, which doctor they should go to for a particular problem. So one's a surgeon, one's an internist. Okay, so a little sideline there. So what do the kidneys do? I mentioned dialysis. If you've ever heard of dialysis before, that is how you clean the blood from whatever waste products you need to get rid of if your kidneys have failed. If you're healthy, your kidneys are doing that for you. So what they do is about a fourth, excuse me, I've got a cold, of the cardiac output goes to the kidneys each minute. So they're highly vascularized. A lot of blood goes through the kidneys. Their function is to remove toxins, metabolic wastes, excess ions, electrolytes, sodium, things like that. Regulate your water balance. I don't even know if I put that on here. Should be. You put water balance. That which helps you regulate your blood volume. You know, how much blood you have based on how much fluid you have in your body, how much water in your body. Your blood volume and your blood pressure are closely related. They help you regulate the chemical composition of your blood and also your pH. They play an endocrine function. Two things that we'll talk about are renin and erythropoietin, which renin has to do with blood pressure control, and erythropoietin is for the regulation of red blood cell production. So to get more red blood cells, you have to have erythropoietin. You also use your kidneys to activate vitamin D. The precursor to vitamin D is in your skin. Sunlight will activate that, or will change that precursor, then goes to the kidney to be actually activated. You need vitamin D to help with the absorption of what mineral? Calcium. So this is some things that the kidney does. If you've had me for 201, you'll know one of the first things I ask you guys to do is to trace a drop of water or a drink of water through the mouth and out through the urethra, and tell me where, which organ systems have to do with that water being absorbed or excreted, or whatever's going on with that water. Which organ systems are you using? Usually the first couple of days, I'll get students who'll say, you drink the water and it goes down your trachea and into your bladder. Hopefully, by now in 202, you know that's completely not right, because number one, if it went down your trachea, you would drown. So obviously it goes down your esophagus into your digestive system, where it's absorbed from your digestive system into the blood. Then from the blood, goes through the kidneys. The kidneys remove that water, and that's how you form the urine. Now, obviously, if everything you drank was, if all your water went through your urine, you would dehydrate really quickly. So luckily, your kidneys can control just how much water, how much urine you need to form, how much water you need to get rid of, and how much you need to conserve. And we're going to talk about that as we go along in the next couple of talks that I give you on the kidney. All right. Like I said, hopefully you've seen the anatomy, but if not, let me do a quick overview. Here's your kidney. The outermost section is the cortex, this light pink area. This darker pink area is the medulla, little divisions here, and then you have the renal pelvis. So this is where your urine is formed. You have arteries and veins, and this is actually the nephron, hence the name nephrology. Okay, so here is your glomerular capsule, goes into the proximal convoluted tubule, which you'll see that written as PCT, then down into the loop of Henle, which has a descending loop and then an ascending loop, into the the distal convoluted tubule, sorry about that, distal convoluted tubule, and then onto the collecting duct. So again, hopefully you've seen that anatomy. What's interesting about the nephron, one of many things that's interesting about the nephron, to me anyway, because I spent 6 years studying the kidney, is each part of the nephron has a different type of cell. And if you go back to 201 and think about histology, we talked about different types of cells, and they're designed for different functions, different purposes. And just real briefly, you'll notice you have different, even shaped cells in these different parts of the nephron. And they each have a different role. You'll see all these little microvilli. What does that do? Increases surface area. So you're thinking, something must go on there. You must need a lot of surface area to do something, right? We're going to talk about what's going on there. But I just want you to see that there's different types of cells in each part of the nephron, and they're specialized for the function that they do in that part of the nephron. Okay, the other thing about the nephron, you have two main types. You have a cortical nephron and a juxtamedullary nephron. So if we were to draw a line, this would be the cortex, this would be the medulla of the kidney. And you have about 1 million nephrons in your kidney, so you have lots and lots of them. They're very, very tiny. The cortical nephrons are mostly in the cortex. You'll notice that most of the nephron is in the cortex. The juxtamedullary nephrons have a long loop of Henle that dips down into the medulla. This type of nephron is important in forming concentrated urine. So when you make your urine dilute or concentrated, you need this long loop of Henle. You'll notice there's some capillary beds You have the glomerular capillary inside the Bowman's capsule or the glomerular capsule. You have these peritubular capillaries all here. And then you have the vasa recta, which is another capillary bed around the lip of Henle. Again, hopefully you have covered the anatomy on this, so that's just kind of a review. Okay, so what's going on? The kidneys filter the body's entire plasma volume 60 times a day. So 60 times a day you are filtering out your blood and getting rid of whatever you need to get rid of. Contrast that to someone who has dialysis. A lot of times dialysis is done about 3 to 4 times a week. And it takes about 3.5 to 4 hours to do that. So that's why they feel really, if you've known a dialysis patient, they'll go in for dialysis, they go in at 8 o'clock, be done about noon. First thing, I mean, they're hungry, they're thirsty, and they feel great. Okay, so they go out, and we used to laugh because at UAB they would go straight to Milo's and get a big old Milo's hamburger and French fries, which is not what you want to do if you're a kidney patient because that's a lot of salt. But anyway, that's what they would do because they felt great. Come Tuesday, they're starting to feel a little worse. Wednesday, a little worse. All that stuff's building up. Those toxins are building up in their body and making them feel a little bad. And they're ready for that next set of dialysis. So luckily for us, we're doing this 60 times a day. So we're constantly keeping everything regulated. Maintaining, what's that big word? Homeostasis, exactly. All right, so basically you've got blood. And what you form, the first step in forming urine is called the filtrate. So that's basically when the blood enters into the nephron, and I'll show you a picture of this in just a second. Everything pretty much goes into the nephron, all the blood plasma. Everything, all the blood plasma except for proteins, and I'm going to go ahead and put this so you'll understand, no cells. So the filtrate is blood plasma with no proteins and no blood cells. So it's just the liquidy stuff, okay? But it does have things like sugars and sodium and potassium, chloride, calcium, things like that are in there. Now, all of the filtrate, if you didn't do anything, if you just urinated all the filtrate, you would quickly dehydrate. You've got to get some of that fluid back. You don't want to get rid of all your filtrate. That's not urine. Once you process the filtrate, that becomes urine. And only about 1% or a little less than 1% of the total filtrate winds up as urine. So you preserve most of your water. All right, so this is going to be a little bit of water and some metabolic waste and other things you want to get rid of. And that's the actual urine. So you take your blood, you form a filtrate, you then, what's the word I'm looking for? Modify the filtrate to form the urine. And we'll talk about those modifications. Okay, when you form urine, you've got to do 3 things. First, you have to filter. So the first step is glomerular filtration, and we're going to go through each one of these steps. Then you have to reabsorb. You don't want to get rid of everything that was in the filtrate. You don't want to just pass that through and excrete that as urine. You want to get some of that back. You want to reabsorb it. When you do that, you get most of your glucose back, or all of your glucose unless you're diabetic, amino acids, 99% of your water, salts, and then some other things. Now some things are not in the plasma, they're not in the blood, or they were not able to pass through the filtrate, and you need to get rid of some extra stuff. And that's secretion. That's when you kind of get rid of stuff that wasn't in the filtrate, that didn't come through, but you need to get rid of some extra stuff. So that's a selective addition. You're adding stuff to the urine. And we'll talk about that. So filtration, absorption, and secretion are the steps to forming urine. Now, let me flip forward just a second, then I'll come back. Let me blow this up. Here's your capsule, okay? And hopefully remember this capillary bed. You have an afferent arteriole, so blood coming in this way. You have the blood inside here. You can see this is very small, just about 1 blood cell thick. And then an efferent, or going away, arteriole. So what's happening is the blood's going in. You can almost think of it as a sponge almost. You're kind of squeezing out the liquid. So the blood goes in here. There's a force, there's blood pressure, is forcing that through here. And this is almost like a sieve, maybe a colander. That might be a better way to think of it, as a colander. It's got holes in it, you know, that are permeable. And so you're basically squeezing out all the water, or the filtrate, into this space, okay? The cells aren't crossing and the big proteins aren't crossing. But all the liquid is going to pass through there, and the filtrate will then go into the nephron. Now, not all the water gets squeezed out. Not all the stuff makes filtrate, because something has to exit. Okay, so some of the water and stuff is not going to be squeezed out, and it's going to be going through the efferent arteriole. Okay, so basically it's just a passive process, and it's all run by hydrostatic pressure. So think about that squeezing. If you're trying to squeeze something through a sieve. It's a very efficient filter, this glomerulus is, because it's permeable. It has a large surface area. You noticed it had lots of little curlicues in there, lots of surface area. The pressure is pretty high. It's higher than other capillary beds, so that it actually can push stuff out into the glomerular capsule. Everything's filtered, everything crosses over except for, like I said, plasma proteins and blood cells. White and red blood cells, they don't cross over. Hope my voice will last. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's go back to those pressures. So here is the afferent arteriole. Blood flow is going this way. So it's, you'll notice it has a bigger diameter than the efferent. So basically you've got a lot of blood coming through, and then almost like a stricture on the other side. So it kind of holds the blood back and makes it stay in here and kind of increases the pressure. You can think of it that way. So HP means hydrostatic pressure. So the pressure pushing the filtrate out of the blood vessel is about, if you measured it, about 55 millimeters of mercury. There's an osmotic pressure and a hydrostatic pressure pushing back. And those two together are about 45. So the net filtration pressure, the net pressure pushing the filtrate into the glomerular capsule is positive. So it pushes that filtrate out. You're probably wondering what this is, that osmotic pressure, and why is it going the other way? You need to go back to 201 if you don't remember this. I don't know if you've covered it in 202, but let's give it just a second. Osmotic pressure, I call it the pressure that sucks, okay? It's basically sucking, it's trying to suck stuff back in. So if you'll think about what was left as the filtrate is leaving the afferent arteriole, leaving this glomerular capillaries, it's going out into this, you're left with big old proteins, right? All right. They want to, remember osmosis, where you're trying to equalize? Remember the red blood cells? We had the tube, and we're trying to equalize the osmotic pressure. Those proteins are actually trying to suck that water back in. They're trying to hold the water back in. But luckily, the hydrostatic pressure is a little bit higher, so the net pressure pushes it forward. Maybe that may have been a little confusing. Hopefully you got that. But anyway, you have osmotic pressure and hydrostatic pressure. This hydrostatic pressure is the filtrate, because you have filtrate out here, and it's actually trying to push itself back in. Okay, so think about if you had, let's see, what would be a good example? I had an example, and I've forgotten. Like a leaky hose. All right, so you put a hose, a leaky hose, like a water hose. Okay, so it's leaky. So if you had this in a vat, but you've got the pressure turned on, okay, you've turned on the spigot, and it's inside a swimming pool, okay? So when you turn on the spigot, the water's going to go out, right? But eventually, there's going to be enough water around the pool to start trying to push that water back in, right? It's going to try to go the other way, unless you do what? You increase the force or the pressure on this side to keep the water going. So that's basically what's happening. This is the swimming pool, and it's trying to push back on the filtration membrane. Okay, that was a very long explanation of that. Sorry. Okay. So the way we measure that, this is one of the ways we measure if a kidney's working or not. Okay, we're looking to see, are your kidneys functioning? And so we look at what's called GFR. It's the glomerular filtration rate. and that's the volume of filtrate that you form per minute by the kidneys. And that's usually somewhere between 100 and 125 milliliters per minute. That's a normal GFR. And that's maintained pretty close all day long. Our GFRs don't change very much from day to day or minute to minute. It's pretty stable. And it's basically governed or directed by the amount of surface area available, okay, the permeability of that membrane, and that net filtration pressure. So all those work together to maintain GFR. Now you can actually change the surface area. Let me go back. When I was in graduate school, what I studied were the little cells called mesangial cells that are all in amongst that glomerular capillary, and actually they can contract and dilate or contract and expand to basically make this surface area bigger or smaller and change the surface area for filtration. All right, how do you think you might change the net filtration pressure? Increase blood pressure. You can do that. All right. All right, so we've made the filtrate. We've taken the blood. Okay, so all the stuff's left, the water and the sodium and potassium and glucose and amino acids, all that is left. It's entered into the proximal convoluted tubule. So let's draw it out real quick. Here's my glomerulus, my glomerular capsule, and the proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. All right, so the proximal convoluted tubule, that's the site of most of our reabsorption. Okay, about 65% of the sodium in water is taken back there. All your nutrients, like glucose, a lot of your ions, and some very small proteins. The big proteins didn't cross, but some small proteins did. So this is your reabsorption, your proximal convoluted tubule. Loop of Henle, this is where we concentrate our urine. So this is where you would make a concentrated or dilute urine. And it has a descending limb for reabsorption of water, and an ascending limb, going back up, for reabsorption of sodium, potassium, and chloride. The distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, this is where reabsorption is regulated by hormones. In the case of calcium, it's parathyroid hormone, water, antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, and sodium by aldosterone and ANP, which is atrial natriuretic factor. So these are the hormones responsible for the reabsorption of calcium, water, and sodium. And we'll do a little more detail in just a second. Okay, so we've made the filtrate, we've reabsorbed what we want, and now we need to get rid of some extra stuff. That's secretion. So that's just reabsorption in reverse. You're putting stuff into the urine. Some things that will be secreted into urine, potassium, hydrogen, ammonium, creatinine, some organic acids. You haven't had this yet, but when you talk about acid-base balance, this is one of those places you can help regulate acid-base balance, regulate the pH in your blood. Let's see if you can remember. All right, pH. If it's acidic, it has a low pH or high pH? Low pH. That means it has a lot of what? A high concentration of what? High concentration of hydrogen. Right? So if you want your urine to be more acidic, you would put more hydrogen in it, right? If you were taking hydrogen out of your body, that would do what? Lower your blood pH. I mean, raise your blood pH, sorry. Raise your blood pH. Okay. All right. What else? You also can secrete substances that are bound to plasma proteins. So maybe some substances that were kind of glued to those plasma proteins that wouldn't cross the filtrate, you now have a chance to secrete them. You can get rid of things like urea and uric acid, which are nitrogenous byproducts. You can get rid of excess potassium. And then, again, regulate blood pH by altering the amounts of hydrogen or bicarbonate in the urine. Okay, so I put this one in here just to kind of have a place for you to go to put it all together. This is more for you. I'll just kind of quickly go over it. But here again is our nephron, have a proximal convoluted tubule, our loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. So what's going on? The blue is reabsorption, the green is secretion. So in the proximal convoluted tubule, you have reabsorption of about 65% of the filtrate. That includes water, sodium bicarbonate, some other ions, amino acids, sugars, glucose, and some other nutrients. You can also secrete things into the proximal convoluted tubule, including hydrogen and some drugs. The loop of Henle, you reabsorb water. This is where you get most of your water back because you don't want to urinate out all your water, so you get a lot of your water back, reabsorb it. In the ascending limb, you reabsorb sodium, potassium, and chloride. Remember, you can also secrete urea in the ascending limb. In the distal convoluted tubule, you have reabsorption of sodium and calcium. Again, these are under hormonal regulation, sodium by aldosterone, which increases sodium reabsorption. That's its job. And calcium reabsorption is controlled by parathyroid hormone. What's the sister hormone to parathyroid hormone? Trick question. Calcitonin. There you go. I knew you remembered it. Okay. Last but not least, in the collecting duct, you have reabsorption of water, sodium, and urea, and then secretion of potassium. And again, those are hormonally regulated. Water by antidiuretic hormone, sodium by aldosterone, urea can be increased from the presence of antidiuretic hormone, and potassium with aldosterone. All right, so this is a great place to kind of use this slide as your overall review of what I've talked about. I've got a few more talks. I'm going to stop here. We'll pick back up on regulation of GFR, and I'll see you in just a minute.